Barakallahu feek Nawaz. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us understanding of the importance of Islamic knowledge. Ameen. Some issues require collective thought and discussion. Through dialogue, perspectives are shared and clarity is developed. Next, we have a panel discussion on the topic Islamophobia. فليتفضلوا مشكورين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wa sayyidil mursaleen. Nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Before we begin, let me ask you something. Why is it that when a crime happens, one religion is mentioned repeatedly while others are not? And why is it one community is asked to explain itself again and again? And how does fear grow even when the facts do not support it? This is not random. This is not a coincidence. This is Islamophobia. A phobia means an irrational fear. Islamophobia is not a healthy criticism or honest disagreement. It is fear manufactured, cultivated, and normalized until it starts to feel like the truth. Today's panel is slightly different. It is not a debate between communities, but it is an internal conversation. So let us hear from our panelists. Students here at Al-Azan will make us understand what is Islamophobia and how can we respond to it without compromising on our values. To guide this discussion, we are joined by 5 panelists. Before introducing them, allow me to introduce myself. I am Hashim, and I will be guiding this panel, and it is both a responsibility and a privilege to guide this discussion on a topic which needs clarity. So let's introduce our panelists. First, Ammar from the 3rd year, then Yasir from the 3rd year, then Abdul Rahman from the 2nd year, then Abdul Qayyum from the 2nd year, then Abdullah from the 2nd year. So let's start with our first question. Islamophobia is a word we hear very often, but unless we define it clearly, we can never challenge it. So what is the concept of Islamophobia?
Jazakallah khair, brother Hashim. Let me start to this point. Islamophobia generally refers to a fear, hatred, or prejudice against Islam or Muslims. However, nowadays this term is used very loosely and emotionally. This reduces clarity and also weakens the real understanding.
Yes, you are right. And let me add to that. At the heart of Islamophobia is fear, not real knowledge. And this fear usually comes from ignorance, not real experience.
Yes, brother. And that fear of Islamophobia doesn't always appear openly. Sometimes it appears as discomfort, constant suspicion, or negativity. But the impact of it remains the same.
Many people claim they are just being critical, but when criticism is built on stereotypes rather than facts, it becomes prejudice. Repeated prejudice slowly turns into ideology.
By the way, Islamophobia is not one feeling. It is a system of fear, misinformation, and repetition that shapes perception over time.
Before we move on, one important question arises. If a particular group of people is targeted not for their belief, but for their names, their background, and their appearance, can Islamophobia consider a form of racism? I'd like one of our panelists to address this briefly.
Definitely, brother. This question is very important. We all know what racism is. Racism is when you outcast a certain group of people based on where they are from or how they look like. When you compare this racism to Islamophobia, you have similar values. Islamophobia is when you outcast a certain group of people based on what they believe. But the damage, the impact, all of it remains the same.
What we learned here is important. Islamophobia is not one single emotion. It is defined differently based on perspectives as fear, as prejudice, or as misinformation, or a system that shapes perspective over time. But out of all these views, one thing remains constant: fear. Fear which is based on ignorance. The fear does not emerge on its own. For this fear to emerge, it must be fed, it must be justified, and most importantly, it must be given a story. This brings us to our next discussion. Where did this fear originated from and how Islamophobia gradually took form?
That's a very important question. Islamophobia did not begin in modern times. One of its earliest roots can be traced back to the Crusades. Muslims were portrayed as enemies to unite people for war.
Yeah, brother, you are absolutely right. I would like to say something here. At that time, most Europeans had never met Muslim. Their understanding of Islam came from sermons and war propaganda, not dialogue or knowledge.
And you know that Islam and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam are deliberately misrepresented. These false ideas were repeated over generations, which turns lies into truth.
And just as he said, did you know colonial literature continued this narrative? Muslims and Islam were shown as backward or dangerous people. And as time went on, this image never really disappeared from people's minds. It only evolved.
And I think this is why Islamophobia feels old, because it has been trained into the minds of the people throughout the history.
We learned from this discussion, history did not just write what has happened. It shaped how people saw others, and it turned some groups into enemies. And these ideas were passed on from generation to the next, and we often inherited these ideas and these enemies without questioning where they came from. But history alone cannot explain why this fear still feels so alive today. In our time, these fears does not spread through sermons or books, but by screens, algorithms, and headlines. So this brings us to our next discussion. What role does media and social media plays in creating and spreading this fear?
Yes, you are absolutely right. Media ownership is concentrated among powerful political and economic rights. And this affects in which stories are created and how they are framed. Bias often works silently.
And I would like to add something to this. Advertising also plays a major role here. Media houses fear losing money or access, so they avoid the narratives that challenges the power.
Let me add something here. If a Muslim commits a crime, religion becomes the headline. If others commit the same crime, religion disappears. This repetition trains the public mind.
Yes, brother. And just as you said, social media worsens this because algorithms, they reward fear, anger, outrage, and things that are related to corruption. But what is actually true is never really shown. Misinformation is spread faster than factual information. Just as brother gave a saying like the headlines always based on Muslims. When Muslims commit something, it becomes a headline. When others commit the same thing, then it's not really shown. I want to give a small example. 2013, Uttar Pradesh. There was a video that went viral claiming that Muslims had killed Hindu men. This video became so viral that people started claiming that Islam was a dangerous religion or Islam was a violent religion. But as time went on, there was more research that was done, finding out that this entire incident didn't even happen in India. It happened in a neighboring country and Muslims were never even involved. But the damage was already done. They had portrayed Islam in a bad image. We understand that this misinformation, it's not because of ignorance, but it is manipulation.
Yes, brother. That's why Muslims stop being seen as neighbors. They start being seen as a problem, which led them to being seen as enemies.
I think the most dangerous distortion is religious misquotation. What do you think?
Definitely, brother. A commonly misquoted verse from the Quran is from Surah At-Tawbah, chapter number 9, verse number 5, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم. Then kill the polytheists wherever you find them. This verse is often misquoted without looking at the context behind it. People see this verse saying that Islam is cruel, violent, and that Islam benefits all these values. But nobody really understands and looks at the context behind it. Because when you look at the verses before it and after it, you come to understand that this verse was revealed in a specific time in history. It was revealed in a battlefield where a treaty was broken and Muslims were under attack. We understand that this misinformation, they just use it as a task, they just use it as a tool to spread Islam and spread hatred. Because how can Islam, a religion that spreads mercy and kindness, how can people say that Islam is a religion that's spread through sword?
What we are seeing here is not random. When media selectively highlights crimes and social media amplifies fear and sacred texts are stripped out of its context, one specific image is created. When this fear is widespread, it usually serves someone. This brings us to an uncomfortable but necessary question: who benefits from Islamophobia?
Please let me start this question, brother. In my opinion, political groups, they use Islamophobia to mobilize voters because fear creates unity against a common enemy.
And just as you said, Islamophobia also justifies surveillance and control. Because when people are scared, they ask fewer questions.
And do you know, it has become a profitable industry. In the US alone, over $200 million was spent between 2008 and 2013 to create fear of Muslims, fear cells.
Yeah. In this generation, media platforms benefits as well. Fear-driven content brings clicks, views, and profit.
Even security and consulting industries grow through fear. Islamophobia becomes both political and economic.
We learned that Islamophobia is a multi-million-dollar industry, but while it serves certain individuals and particular groups, others pay a huge price. This brings us to our next question: what is the impact of Islamophobia and how does it affect individuals, families, and society?
That's a relevant question. Islamophobia leads to discrimination and harassment in daily life. Many Muslims feel unsafe in public places, workplaces, or schools. This constant fear affects mental well-being.
This constant suspicion, it causes anxiety and emotional stress. As a result, the Muslims, they don't participate in society. They withdraw themselves completely. As a result, they're being seen as outsiders.
And there is a very important point to be noted here. Muslim women are often targeted more due to their visible religious identity. This affects their education, employment, and also social confidence. And it also creates a barriers that others do not face.
On a larger level, Islamophobia divides the society into us and them. Trust between communities weakens, social cooperation becomes difficult.
Yeah. At the same time, facing discrimination can also create resilience. Communities often support each other more strongly, but resilience should not be forced by injustice.
We discussed about Islamophobia from its origins to its modern forms and who benefits from it and how it affects the societies. But our discussion is incomplete without addressing one essential question: how can we respond to Islamophobia? When Islamophobia is discussed, the focus is entirely put upon the external hostility. But many scholars argue that Muslims too have a responsibility on how the faith is understood, represented, and practiced in public life. So, with that in mind, I invite our panelists to discuss on how can we respond to Islamophobia without compromising on our principles.
Yes, that's an important starting point, and I would like to start here. There is a deep internal division among the Muslims today. The attitude of they don't practice like we do has become common. This mindset makes the Islam looks very narrow and sectarian, even though Islam is wide and inclusive.
Just as you said, social isolation is also a big issue because many Muslims seclude themselves to Muslim-only shops, Muslim-only groceries, spaces, etc. As I said before, as a result of that, they don't participate in the society. Then people look at them as outsiders, not as people from the community.
So the real problem is withdrawal from the society, not the religion.
Exactly, Islam does not demand segregation. Social isolation is a human choice and it has the consequences.
And you know, this is where entrepreneurship can make a difference. Businesses can create shared spaces, markets that include all kind of faith. When the people work together and depend upon each other economically, fear naturally decreases.
Likewise, dialogue is crucial. There is very little real conversation between communities. When Muslims withdraw completely from others, they only see from the outside, through media or stereotypes. If there were regular and honest conversation, people would understand Islam directly, not through from fear-based narratives.
Yes, my opinion is that here, role of religious leaders and scholars are important. The most crucial role is that of religious leaders. They should preach peace, tolerance, and educate the people on how to defend these false ideologies.
And in my opinion, youth must also learn to deconstruct fake news, because the deconstruction of fake news is the most important activity. And they should also learn to break down the key terms of false propaganda against Islam or Muslims.
Yes, brother. Just as he said, youth must also play a big role in deconstructing what is the news. As I mentioned regarding digital media, traditional media is also very important and it plays a big role. It plays a big impact because it must know what is the factual information and what is not and give that according to the public. It should avoid sensationalism, prejudice and being biased. Only then people will get to know the knowledge of what Islam really is and not grow on fear-based narratives.
And you know, Islam is not one narrow-based interpretation. Its core values are mercy, dignity. Its core values are mercy, dignity, and we should reflect that through our conduct.
Education at home and institution is key. In the early ages of children, they need to be taught about various religions and cultures which are common. That's how fear is stopped before it begins.
Something very important also on how we should respond to Islamophobia, it's knowledge. Knowledge on knowing our deen, knowledge of our deen. Because when other non-Muslims, they come to us saying things about our religion, if a Muslim does not have knowledge on his own deen, the right knowledge according to the Quran and Sunnah, there's no way he could defend himself correctly. And they would just say anything and he would just listen to it. As a result, this would completely distort what his image is. So we as Muslims, it is our role to gain knowledge which is correct and defend Islam accordingly through it.
Our panelists have given concrete solutions to Islamophobia. Today was not about defending Islam. Islam does not need defense. Islamophobia is built on ignorance, but when it is met with knowledge, confidence and integrity, it collapses. If fear can be taught, then understanding can be taught and taught better. I sincerely thank our panelists for sharing their time, insights and their thoughtful perspectives, and I sincerely thank our audiences for having an attentive and engaged presence. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding of Islam and the sincerity to follow what we learned today and the strength to uphold and defend our religion. Wa amin wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.